Humble Bundle is doing their winter sale, which is what I call Steam's winter sale 2.0. It's a slimmed down version of what Steam offered. However, there's still a lot of great games here with the same prices, so if you missed out on them a month ago, now's your chance for picking them up. Let's start with a lot of my usual JRPG lists, but I mention them because they're great games and you can usually get them for less than $10. So you get a 50-hour game for less than $5 and they're worth the time and the investment. So let's start out with Tales of Zestria for $4.99. I just went through this game again, and well, I can say nothing really has changed my opinion from my review I did several years ago. Zestria is a deeply flawed but still very enjoyable game. It's got an interesting world, it's got an interesting lore, it just has some really bad characters and the dynamics between them aren't as good as the other Tales game. But the overall progression of it was enjoyable. I had fun playing through it. It's just not as captivating as the rest of the Tales series. I do want to warn you, I just went through the DLC Alicia story. Do not pick that up. It's not on sale on Humble, fortunately, but I picked it up on Steam for like $2. Not only was it a waste of $2, but it was a waste of about 10 hours of my life going through this slog. So don't get Alicia's story. But the main Tales of Zestria game is worth picking up for $5. Going on to Tales of Berseria, which is also $5, I'm starting this up again to collect more footage, and yeah, the night and day differences between this and Zestria. Set 1,000 years before Zestria, although I would argue it should be probably more like 10,000 considering the changes to the landscape and to the countries and everything. But still, it's a great game. Berseria follows Velvet Crow, a young girl whose stepbrother and father, Arthur, betrays her, kills her younger brother, and turns Velvet into a demon, then imprisons her for several years. Velvet eventually escapes and tries to find Arthur, but he is now the shepherd, getting rid of the demon blight, a mysterious illness that turns people into monsters. But all Velvet really cares about is one thing: revenge. My coworker said this is a female Berserk, and while I haven't seen Berserk, I know enough about the story to see where he's coming from. If most Tales games are taking their cues from older beat-em-ups when it comes to the gameplay, this battle system is more like a modern-day action game like Devil May Cry or God of War, but I say that in a good way, as you get to build and select your combos as you level up rather than have them given to you, and you're going to be changing them depending on what your gauge is like and what enemy you're battling. So it's a fun and it's an interesting system, and this game is well worth $5. It's a really great experience. With that said, Tales of Vesperia for $9.99 is even better. This is my favorite Tales game, both in combat and story, mainly because it avoids a lot of JRPG tropes. Yuri Lowell is not some wide-eyed teenager or some emo punk, but unlike other JRPG characters, Yuri's not afraid to get his hands dirty, and his personality as he becomes a father figure to a bunch of misfits is legit funny and memorable. The first two-thirds of this game is the best JRPG ever made. It does get a little weak in the last third, when they go into the tropes that Vesperia was working so hard to try to avoid, but it's far from being bad in that last third. It's my favorite game on this sale listed this week, and it includes a few classics that are on top of everyone else's list. Finally, the OG Tales game, Tales of Symphonia for $4.99. This game does rip off story elements from both Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy V, but it rips them off well, with some memorable characters and voice acting that holds up even today. The story is set in a world of Silverant that says whenever disaster strikes and mana runs low, that a chosen one must go through a ritual and reach the goddess Martel so she can restore the mana to the world. In the meantime, a bunch of elves called the Designs pretty much get free reign of the place and cause misery. Lloyd and Genius are best friends with Colette, who is the current chosen one, and they end up joining her party when they manage to get exiled from their village for pissing off a bunch of Desians. As they travel, they find out that this ritual is more than meets the eye, as Colette starts to lose more and more of her humanity as they travel along. And they find out that there's another world involved into this too. If Silverant manages to get back its mana and maintain stability, this world will crumble and die, as Lloyd tries to figure out the solution to the problem that plexes both worlds. It's an interesting game. The combat system's a little bit on the old school side. This was the first 3D Tales game, so movement in 3D is a bit limited compared to, say, Berseria, but it's still a fun and solid experience and well worth $5 and the time it takes to complete. Moving on to Final Fantasy, we got the Final Fantasy VII Remake. This is at its usual sale price of $35. This is the PlayStation 5 version with the bonus content and everything. And so far I'm actually enjoying the remake more than I thought I would. It really gets the Midgar section right, as the original one going through the Midgar was just various versions of brown. This one is much colorful, if it's still an awful place to live. Throw in some good combat and a decent revision of the story with a few flaws, like it expects you to play through the original to understand everything that's going on. But it is a good game and it's worth getting invested in, and $35 isn't bad for the experience. I take it over the $70 that they usually charge. Final Fantasy XII has some really great world building with very memorable lived-in world with its own politics, a combat system that does take a bit to learn but is very rewarding to master, and more side quests than you can shake a chocobo at. The only thing that stops it from being really top tier is the story. I have a feeling the writers had an epic story dealing with a betrayed knight, a princess without her kingdom, and a normal man who's turned into a Han Solo meets James Bond pirate. But somewhere up in corporate, they said, nah, that won't capture the right demographic, and decided to choose the two kids that have very little to do with the story as the leads. Because of this, the people who need the limelight never get it, and these two who have no impact in the story overall don't have anything to do past the 5-hour mark, making for a bit of a lame and boring story. But if you can get past that, the rest of this game is actually really flawless and really fun to play, well worth $20. Final Fantasy IV 3D is the best version of Final Fantasy IV you can find on Steam. If you can look past that this was originally on the Nintendo DS and has somewhat dated graphics, you'll get fully voiced cutscenes of this amazing story, a battle system that's a bit more open than most of the console iterations, and the Steam version also includes an easy mode that is still harder than most versions of Final Fantasy IV, but it's not impossible to beat, except for Dr. Luigi here, screw that fight. It's still an amazing game, and this is an amazing version, well worth trying for $6.39. Yeah, the legendary Chrono Trigger. I would argue that it's certainly the best game for its generation, hands down. When you put it to the likes of Final Fantasy VI and Mario RPG in the mix, that is indeed high praise. But it's not the best of all time in my opinion. There are a few flaws, like it's not that you can see and dodge enemies, they're just scripted fights in most places, for example, and that there are other JRPGs that I play and enjoy, like Tales of Vesperia, more. But still, it's got a great battle system, great world, super fun story, and with people who made both Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest working on that, what's not to like? And it's well worth $7.50 if you've never played this amazing game. Last and somewhat least is the hyperdimensional Neptunia series. Now, I don't think Idea Factory makes bad RPGs. I just don't think they make very good RPGs. But I would be lying if I didn't say Neptunia usually makes me laugh and laugh hard. And for $14 for 3 Neptunia games, it might be worth checking out. The original one's probably the most flawed, but it does have some decent bits and story about the game industry, or at least the way it was about 10-15 years ago during the PS3 and Wii era. And then the second bit focuses more on the handheld, and again, Xbox 360, PS3 era still in the crosshair. And then finally, Rebirth 3, which is my favorite, kind of goes back in time and actually takes a look and pokes fun of the industry in the 80s and 90s and how the current console setup came to be. It's not bad, and this game is pretty funny. Like I said, expect somewhat shallow and repetitive gameplay. It's not that there aren't any good ideas or that there aren't any efforts, it's just extremely low budgeted. I enjoyed the story, they made me laugh, but this isn't for everyone. But if you're curious, you could do worse than 3 games for $14. Anyways, this is Tommy the Game Master. If you found this guide useful, please leave a like and subscribe. I will see you guys next week, and I will be covering a few more action-oriented games that are going to be on this humble winter sale. You have a wonderful day. Bye.
It's you, the impudent one.
Says the demon who torched Televes.
You knew about that?
I hope you realize we're doing you a favor. If you'd stayed on that course, you would have smashed right up against the gate of Vortigern.
You guys are headed for Midgar, aren't you? That means you're gonna have to go through the